In a quiet little town nestled in the heart of the Midwest, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, and neighbors knew each other by name. But beneath this picturesque surface lay simmering tensions between the townsfolk and the local police department. Over the years, complaints about rude behavior, unnecessary stops, and unfair treatment had piled up, but nothing ever seemed to change. People whispered about it behind closed doors, but no one dared to speak out loud. Enter Officer Greg Harper, a young man fresh out of the academy with a badge that gleamed brighter than his sense of judgment. Greg wasn't bad at heart, but he carried an inflated ego and a misguided belief that being a cop gave him license to do whatever he pleased. He saw himself as the hero of the town, even though most people found him arrogant and overbearing. His senior officers often warned him to tone down his attitude, but Greg shrugged them off. "I'm just doing my job," he'd say, though deep down, he craved attention and validation more than anything else. One chilly autumn evening, Greg was driving through Maple Park, one of the quieter parts of town. It was nearing midnight and the park was nearly empty except for a lone figure sitting on a bench near the fountain. As Greg slowed his patrol car, his headlights illuminated the person, a woman wrapped in a woolen scarf, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of coffee. Her curly hair stood out like a crown, catching the light in a way that made Greg pause. The woman's name was Dr. Evelyn Carter, though Greg had no idea who she really was. To him, she looked unassuming, maybe even vulnerable. What he didn't know was that Evelyn was anything but ordinary. A highly decorated professional, she had spent decades climbing the ranks of law enforcement, earning degrees, accolades, and respect along the way. Now she held one of the most powerful positions in the country, chief of the FBI. But tonight she wasn't wearing a suit or giving speeches. She was undercover, quietly gathering information about corruption within neighboring police departments. Greg pulled his car into the parking lot and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel path. He approached Evelyn with a swagger that masked his insecurity. "Ma'am," he said loudly, startling her. "What are you doing out here so late?" Evelyn turned to look at him, her expression calm, but guarded. "Just enjoying some fresh air," she replied smoothly. There was something steady and commanding about her voice, though Greg didn't notice. All he saw was an opportunity to flex his authority. "Well, it's not safe for someone like you to be out here alone," Greg said, folding his arms across his chest. "You never know what kind of trouble you might run into." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his tone. "Someone like me?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Greg hesitated, realizing he might have said too much. "You know, women walking around by themselves. It's dangerous." "Thank you for your concern, officer," Evelyn said politely. "But I assure you I'll be fine." Her composed demeanor irritated Greg. He wanted her to react, to show fear or deference, but she remained unfazed. That's when a mischievous thought crossed his mind. If she wouldn't respond to his attempts at authority, maybe he could provoke her another way. Without thinking twice, Greg reached into his patrol car and grabbed a pair of scissors he kept, handy for emergencies. They weren't meant for cutting hair, of course, but Greg wasn't thinking clearly. "You know," he said with a smirk, stepping closer to Evelyn. "Your hair looks kind of wild. Maybe I should help you tidy it up." Evelyn stared at him, her dark eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, she considered calling him out right then and there. After all, she could end his career with a single phone call. But something stopped her. Instead, she leaned back slightly, studying him with detached interest. "Go ahead," she said softly, almost daring him. "Do what you feel you must." Greg froze for a second, surprised by her response. Then, emboldened by her apparent passivity, he took another step forward. Little did he know this decision would alter both their lives forever. Part 2, Expanded. With the scissors in hand, Greg felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. He told himself it was all in good fun, a harmless prank to teach this woman a lesson about respecting authority. Deep down, however, he knew it wasn't entirely innocent. Cutting someone's hair without permission was invasive and disrespectful, but Greg pushed those thoughts aside. In his mind, he was untouchable. No one would question his actions because, after all, he was the one wearing the badge. As he moved closer to Evelyn, she sat perfectly still, her gaze unwavering. There was no trace of fear in her eyes, only a quiet intensity that unsettled Greg, momentarily. Still, he pressed on, snipping away at her curls with clumsy motions. Each cut sent strands of hair fluttering to the ground, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable. When Greg finally stepped back to admire his handiwork, he couldn't help but chuckle. "There," he said smugly. "Much better. You look less messy now." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, examining the damage in the reflection of her phone screen. Her once voluminous afro was now uneven and patchy, a stark contrast to its former glory. Yet, instead of reacting with anger or tears, she smiled faintly. "Well done, officer," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Now tell me, what exactly did I do to deserve this?" Greg blinked, caught off guard by her composure. Most people would have screamed or cried by now, but Evelyn remained eerily calm. He stammered, suddenly unsure of himself. "It was just a joke, lighten up, a joke," Evelyn repeated, her tone sharp enough to make Greg flinch. "So, violating someone's personal space and destroying their property is funny to you?" "It's just hair," Greg shot back defensively. "It'll grow back." Evelyn stood up slowly, brushing stray strands off her coat. "Hair is more than just hair, Officer Harper," she said, her voice firm yet controlled. "For many people, especially women of color, our hair is tied to our identity, our culture, and our pride. By taking that away, you've shown me exactly who you are." Greg opened his mouth to argue but quickly shut it again. Something about the way she spoke, the authority in her voice, made him hesitate. For the first time that night, he began to wonder if he'd gone too far. Before he could say anything else, Evelyn pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of him. "If you'll excuse me, officer, I need to file a report about this incident." With that, she walked away, leaving Greg standing alone in the park, scissors still in hand. Back home, Evelyn uploaded the photo to social media, along with a brief description of what had happened. Within hours, the post went viral, sparking outrage across the internet. People condemned Greg's actions, calling for accountability and justice. Meanwhile, Evelyn quietly returned to Washington, D.C., where she began preparing for the next phase of her plan. Unbeknownst to Greg, his reckless prank had set off a chain reaction that would soon expose not only his own misconduct but also the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement nationwide. And as the story continued to unfold, Evelyn would prove to be far more than just a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with. The next morning, Officer Greg Harper woke up feeling uneasy. He had tossed and turned all night, replaying the events in the park over and over in his mind. At first, he tried to convince himself it was no big deal, a harmless prank that would blow over quickly. But as he scrolled through his phone while sipping his coffee, his stomach sank. The story of what he'd done was everywhere, on social media, local news websites, and even national headlines. A video someone had secretly recorded during the incident had surfaced online, showing Greg snipping away at Evelyn's hair with a smug grin on his face. Comments poured in from people across the country, calling him everything from reckless to cruel. Some even compared his actions to bullying or hate crimes. The backlash grew louder by the hour, with hashtags like Justice for Evelyn trending nationwide. Greg felt a mix of shame and panic bubbling inside him. He called his sergeant, hoping for reassurance or advice. Instead, he got an earful. "What were you thinking?" his boss barked over the phone. "This isn't just some minor mistake, it's a public relations nightmare." By midday, reporters began camping outside the police station, demanding statements from both Greg and the department. The mayor issued a vague apology, saying they were looking into the matter, but many residents weren't satisfied. Protesters gathered in front of the station holding signs that read, "Respect our community," and "No more abuse of power." Meanwhile, Evelyn was hard at work behind the scenes. She returned to Washington, D.C., where she immediately assembled a team of investigators to dig deeper into the incident. Using her influence as FBI chief, she launched a broader inquiry, not just into Greg's actions, but into patterns of misconduct within law enforcement agencies across the region. Her goal wasn't just to punish one officer. She wanted to expose the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to happen in the first place. As the investigation gained momentum, more stories emerged. Residents came forward with accounts of similar encounters with officers, ranging from rude comments to outright harassment. One woman recounted how she'd been stopped multiple times for no reason other than driving a nice car. Another man described being handcuffed and detained, without cause simply because he looked suspicious. These testimonies painted a disturbing picture of a culture steeped in bias and unchecked power. Back in the small town, Greg became the face of the scandal. His colleagues distanced themselves, embarrassed by his behavior. Even friends and family members started treating him differently, unsure of how to defend him when the evidence against him was so damning. For the first time in his life, Greg felt truly alone. But Evelyn wasn't done yet. During a live press conference broadcast to millions, she stepped onto the stage wearing a tailored suit, her newly styled hair perfectly framing her face. Cameras flashed as she addressed the nation, her voice steady and commanding. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident," she said. "It is symptomatic of a much larger problem, a lack of accountability and respect within our justice system." She went on to announce sweeping reforms aimed at addressing these issues, including mandatory sensitivity training, increased use of body cameras, and stricter penalties for officers who violated protocol. The crowd erupted in applause, but Evelyn kept her focus sharp. This wasn't about revenge or personal vendettas, it was about creating lasting change. For Greg, watching the press conference felt like a punch to the gut. He realized too late that he had underestimated Evelyn completely. She wasn't just another citizen. He had messed with someone who could dismantle entire systems if she chose to. As the weight of his actions settled heavily on his shoulders, Greg knew his life would never be the same again. In the weeks following the press conference, Greg Harper found himself drowning in consequences. Suspended from duty pending an internal investigation, he spent his days holed up in his apartment, avoiding eye contact with neighbors and ignoring the constant notifications on his phone. Every knock on the door sent his heart racing. Was it another reporter? A protester? Or worse, a summons to court? The once confident officer now struggled to leave the house, haunted by the knowledge that millions of people despised him. His superiors offered little support, throwing him under the bus to save face. He acted alone, they told the media, distancing themselves from Greg as if he were radioactive. Meanwhile, his family grew distant. His wife, Sarah, couldn't bear the embarrassment any longer and moved out with their 2 kids. "I can't keep explaining this to them," she said tearfully before packing her bags. "They're getting teased at school because of you." Feeling cornered and humiliated, Greg spiraled into despair. He stopped shaving, ate takeout straight from the box, and spent hours staring blankly at the ceiling. Nights were the hardest. Sleep eluded him as memories of that fateful night in the park replayed in his mind like a broken record. Evelyn's calm, piercing gaze haunted his dreams, reminding him of the line he had crossed. Amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as Greg sat slumped on his couch scrolling through old photos of happier times, there was a knock at the door. Reluctantly, he answered it to find a courier holding a plain white envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to him. It read, "Dear Mr. Harper, I imagine you've been carrying a heavy burden since our encounter in the park. While your actions were deeply hurtful, I believe everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow. If you're willing, I'd like to meet with you privately to discuss what happened and perhaps explore ways we can move forward together. Sincerely, Dr. Evelyn Carter." At first, Greg thought it was a trap. Why would the very person he had wronged want to help him? But curiosity got the better of him, and after days of deliberation, he decided to accept her invitation. They agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. When Greg arrived, he spotted Evelyn sitting by the window sipping tea. She looked every bit as composed and commanding as she had during the press conference. Nervously, he approached her table. "Chief Carter," he stammered, unsure of what to say. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Her tone was neither warm nor cold, it was neutral, professional. "Thank you for coming." For the next hour, Evelyn explained her perspective. She didn't sugarcoat what Greg had done, nor did she let him off the hook. But she also made it clear that her mission wasn't vengeance, it was transformation. "Punishing you won't fix the root of the problem," she said. "What will fix it is education, empathy, and accountability. That's why I'm offering you a choice. Participate in a rehabilitation program designed to help former offenders reintegrate into society, or continue down this path of isolation and regret." Greg listened intently, tears welling up in his eyes. For the first time in months, he saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe he couldn't undo what he'd done, but he could try to make amends. With trembling hands, he accepted Evelyn's offer. Over the following months, Greg threw himself into the program. He attended workshops on cultural sensitivity, implicit bias, and conflict resolution. He volunteered at community centers, mentoring at-risk youth and sharing his story to warn others about the dangers of unchecked privilege. Slowly but surely, he began rebuilding his life. Evelyn kept tabs on his progress, occasionally checking in to see how he was doing. Though she remained cautious, she couldn't deny that Greg was changing for the better. And as he transformed, so did the community around him. Inspired by Evelyn's leadership, other towns followed suit, implementing reforms and fostering dialogue between citizens and law enforcement. Greg's journey wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't perfect. But it proved one thing: redemption is possible, even for those who have fallen the farthest. Greg Harper's transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, grueling process filled with moments of doubt and self-reflection. The rehabilitation program Evelyn had recommended wasn't just about sitting in classrooms and listening to lectures. It required real action. Greg had to face his mistakes head-on, confront the harm he had caused, and actively work toward becoming someone better. One of the first steps was attending group sessions where former offenders shared their stories. At first, Greg felt out of place. Many of the participants were individuals who had committed far more serious crimes than him: drug dealers, thieves, even violent offenders. He wondered if he truly belonged there. But as he listened to their experiences, something shifted inside him. These weren't bad people, as he'd always assumed criminals were. They were human beings who had made poor choices, often driven by desperation or ignorance. Hearing their struggles reminded Greg that everyone has the capacity for change, and that included him. During one particularly emotional session, a woman named Maria spoke about how her life had been derailed after being wrongfully targeted by police during a routine traffic stop. Her account struck a nerve with Greg. She described feeling powerless, humiliated, and angry, not unlike how Evelyn must have felt that night in the park. For the first time, Greg saw himself through someone else's eyes. He realized that his actions hadn't just hurt Evelyn. They had reinforced a system that oppressed countless others like Maria. Outside of the sessions, Greg threw himself into community service projects. He began volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring teenagers who came from troubled backgrounds. At first, the kids were hesitant to trust him. Who could blame them? A former cop walking into their space wasn't exactly a comforting sight. But Greg didn't give up. He showed up week after week, helping with homework, teaching basketball, drills, and simply listening when they needed someone to talk to. Slowly, the walls came down. Some of the teens even started opening up to him, sharing their fears about encounters with law enforcement or the pressures of growing up in neighborhoods plagued by crime. Through these interactions, Greg gained a new perspective on policing. He began to understand why so many people distrusted officers. They'd been let down too many times. Instead of seeing the community as adversaries, he learned to view them as partners in creating safer streets. This shift in mindset was monumental, not only for Greg but also for those around him. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to monitor Greg's progress from afar. Though she maintained a professional distance, she occasionally sent updates to her team, ensuring that the program remained effective and impactful. When reports reached her about Greg's efforts at the youth center, she allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps this experiment would pay off after all. As months passed, Greg became more outspoken about reforming law enforcement practices. He started speaking at conferences, sharing his story with raw honesty. "I used to think I was untouchable because I wore a badge," he admitted during one speech. "But I was wrong. My arrogance blinded me to the pain I was causing. If we want to rebuild trust between police and the communities they serve, we need to start by holding ourselves accountable." His words resonated with audiences across the country. People appreciated his vulnerability and willingness to take responsibility for his actions. While some critics accused him of seeking redemption, for selfish reasons, most recognized that his efforts were genuine. Even Evelyn acknowledged that Greg had come a long way since that fateful night in Maple Park. By the end of the year, Greg had become an unlikely advocate for change. His journey wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't perfect. But it proved that even those who make terrible mistakes can find a path to redemption. And as he stood on stage addressing a packed auditorium, he couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose he'd never known before. Years later, Greg Harper was no longer the brash, overconfident rookie officer who thought he could do no wrong. Now, he was a respected figure in the movement for police reform, a living testament to the power of accountability and growth. His transformation had inspired countless others to examine their own biases and strive for meaningful change. Yet, despite his success, Greg often found himself reflecting on the woman who had set him on this path, Dr. Evelyn Carter. Evelyn, meanwhile, had risen to legendary status within law enforcement circles. After spearheading sweeping reforms and leading high-profile investigations, she eventually retired from her position as FBI chief. But retirement didn't mean slowing down. She devoted her time to writing books, giving lectures, and mentoring young professionals eager to follow in her footsteps. Her legacy extended far beyond policy changes. It was woven into the fabric of a nation striving to heal its divisions. Despite their vastly different roles, Greg and Evelyn stayed in touch. Their relationship evolved from one of teacher and student to something resembling mutual respect. Occasionally, they would meet for coffee, discussing everything from politics to personal growth. During one such meeting, Greg broached a question that had lingered in his mind for years. "Chief Carter," he said hesitantly, stirring sugar into his tea, "do you ever regret letting me off the hook? I mean, I deserved everything I got, and probably more." Evelyn smiled faintly, leaning back in her chair. "Regret isn't the right word," she replied. "What happened to you was painful, yes, but it gave you a chance to learn and grow. More importantly, it gave others hope that change is possible even for someone like you." Her answer left Greg speechless. He had spent years trying to prove himself worthy of forgiveness, yet Evelyn's words reminded him that true redemption wasn't about earning approval. It was about making amends and dedicating yourself to doing better. In the years that followed, Greg continued to speak at events, sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. He became especially passionate about training programs for new officers, emphasizing the importance of empathy, humility, and cultural awareness. "You don't have to be perfect," he would tell cadets, "but you do have to care. If you lose sight of that, you've already failed." For Evelyn, watching Greg's evolution was both satisfying and humbling. She had always believed in second chances, but seeing them play out in real life reaffirmed her faith in humanity. Her decision to extend grace to Greg hadn't just changed his life. It had sparked a ripple effect that touched countless others. The incident in Maple Park eventually faded from public memory, replaced by newer headlines and evolving conversations about justice and equality. Yet its impact endured. Towns across the country adopted policies inspired by Evelyn's reforms, while Greg's advocacy helped bridge gaps between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Together, They proved that even the darkest moments could lead to brighter futures if people were willing to confront the truth and embrace change. And so, two very different lives intertwined in unexpected ways, leaving behind a legacy of resilience, redemption, and hope. Years had passed since that fateful night in Maple Park, and the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The story of Officer Greg Harper and Dr. Evelyn Carter became a symbol of accountability, redemption, and the power of systemic change. It wasn't just their individual journeys that left a lasting mark. It was the ripple effect they created together, touching lives far beyond what either of them could have imagined. Greg's transformation from a reckless rookie cop to a vocal advocate for reform inspired countless others to confront their own biases and take responsibility for their actions. His speeches at conferences, schools, and community centers drew standing ovations. People admired his courage, not because he had done something heroic, but because he had faced his darkest moment head-on and emerged stronger. He often began his talks with the same line: "I'm not here to tell you I'm perfect. I'm here to show you that imperfection doesn't define us. What we do about it does." One of Greg's proudest achievements came when he helped launch a national mentorship program aimed at fostering trust between law enforcement officers and the communities they served. The program paired experienced officers with young recruits, teaching them the importance of empathy, communication, and cultural sensitivity. Greg himself mentored dozens of cadets, sharing his mistakes openly and encouraging them to learn from his failures. "If I can change," he'd say, "so can you." While Greg worked tirelessly on the ground level, Evelyn continued to shape the future of justice from behind the scenes. Though retired, she remained an influential voice in policy discussions, advocating for reforms that prioritized fairness and equality. Her books became required reading for aspiring leaders, and her lectures packed auditoriums worldwide. She often spoke about the need for humility in positions of power, reminding audiences that true leadership meant listening as much as leading. But perhaps Evelyn's greatest legacy was the generation of young professionals she inspired. Many of her mentees went on to hold prominent roles in law enforcement, government, and advocacy groups, carrying forward her vision of a more equitable society. One of them, a bright young woman named Jasmine, rose to become the youngest police chief in her state. During her swearing-in ceremony, she dedicated her achievement to Evelyn, saying, "She taught me that being a leader isn't about wielding authority. It's about serving others with integrity and compassion." Despite their vastly different paths, Greg and Evelyn occasionally crossed paths at events or over coffee. Their conversations always circled back to the lessons they'd learned along the way. "You know," Greg once said during one of these meetings, "people call me brave for owning up to my mistakes. But the real bravery was yours, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve it." Evelyn chuckled softly, shaking her head. "It wasn't about deserving it, Greg. It was about believing in the possibility of change. If we only give second chances to those who deserve them, we'll never move forward as a society." Her words stayed with Greg long after their meeting ended, reinforcing the values he now lived by. He realized that Evelyn's decision to extend grace hadn't just changed his life. It had set a standard for how people should treat one another. Forgiveness, he learned, wasn't about excusing wrongdoing. It was about creating opportunities for growth and healing. As time went on, the incident in Maple Park became less about Greg's mistake and more about the broader conversation it sparked. Communities across the country began implementing policies inspired by Evelyn's reforms, including mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, and diversity training programs. Police departments started partnering with local organizations to build bridges with residents, hosting town halls and collaborative events designed to foster mutual understanding. Even small towns like the one where Greg had once patrolled saw dramatic shifts. Officers who had previously been seen as adversaries were now welcomed into neighborhoods as allies. Parents felt safer letting their children play outside, knowing that law enforcement was working to protect rather than intimidate. These changes didn't happen overnight, but they proved that progress was possible when people committed to doing better. For Greg, the ultimate validation came during a visit back to his hometown. Walking through Maple Park, the very place where his life had taken a drastic turn, he noticed something remarkable. Families gathered under the trees, laughter filling the air. Children chased each other around the fountain while parents chatted. Nearby, a group of teenagers played basketball on a court recently renovated by volunteers, including some former cops turned mentors. Among them was Greg himself, coaching a team of eager players. As he watched the scene unfold, Greg felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This park, once a symbol of his lowest moment, had transformed into a testament to resilience and unity. He thought about Evelyn and the unwavering belief she'd shown in him years ago. Without her intervention, none of this might have been possible. In the end, the story of Greg Harper and Evelyn Carter wasn't just about two individuals. It was about the collective effort to create a fairer, kinder world. Their journey reminded everyone that even the most painful experiences could lead to meaningful change if approached with honesty and determination. And as Greg walked away from the park that day, he carried with him not just memories of the past but hope for the future, a future shaped by lessons learned, bridges built, and lives transformed.